All right, thank you so much. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Perfect. All right. So Representative Brian Farnen, and from my perspective as a parent, this past spring, the distance learning really was emergency distance learning. And I think a lot of parents would give school systems kind of a pass from what happened this spring, because obviously the pandemic, no one was expecting it. I think there's a fair amount of angst moving forward that the lessons learned from this past spring are not being addressed. And one thing in particular, I have a few questions, and I'll stop with the pontificating after the first one. For example, there seems like there needs to be more guidance coming back from the state, from both minimum requirements as well as best practices. I think this will give the schools some level of cover, and also give them targets to kind of achieve for this upcoming school year. Here's just one example. Like, why was the 50-50 live instruction not required in just a mere suggestion, especially knowing that many of the kids did drop off this past spring?
Thank you for the question and for the concern. We agree, and I'll have Irene share the timeline. I think we have something ready to go that really makes it a little bit more specific. What's expected if remote learning is going to count as a day? We agree with that, but we also know that in the spring, as it was an emergency, as you mentioned, and we had many students without access to technology, and we had in many cases situations where our educator staff, the availability with what they were dealing with at home as well. But I think equally as important is the fact that in many cases students were sharing laptops. So if it was synchronous learning,
looking backwards, I'm really looking forward.
Oh, okay. I thought you were talking about. Yeah. Okay, I thought you were talking about in the past why that was happening. We do have standards, so I'm going to turn it over to Irene to share what those are and when they're coming out.
Sure. Thank you, Commissioner. Again, we agree, and taking the lessons learned, as you said, Representative Farnen. So going forward, we are providing instructional school day guidance on what engaged learning should look like in that school day, including not only the engaged synchronous learning, but then the flex time that happens before and after. And with that are some of our best promising practices that we have learned across from all districts statewide and even partner states. And that has been included in this guidance that we're about ready to share, in addition to some examples, some sample schedules, even planning templates. And again, it's also learning from those districts that have been doing this and that were very innovative with what they had. So we are sharing statewide with this guidance going forward very soon.
Okay. And I guess I would like to see the 50-50 live instruction be a requirement, as almost like as a floor, and the ceiling can be just basically what the best practices are. And encouraging the live instruction or live streaming would be helpful too, because that's the state giving some of the, that would, I think, help with the town's implementation plans. But next question I had was regarding funding. Our district at Fairfield received less than $100 per student for the year. How do you see districts meeting all the requirements in the state reopening plan, plus the addendums, plus run a parallel school system for full distance learning? In Fairfield, for example, it's 10,000 students on $1,000 a year. And then you've got obviously all the PPE and cleaning supplies. And our superintendent submitted a $2.5 million plan. How can we spend more money, and what are we doing to push the federal government to provide more funds?
Thank you for expressing the concern and the challenges that you're facing in Fairfield. We recognize that, not in all cases will the funds that we've given so far cover everything, and we recognize the challenge that districts are facing. Kathy, with regard to the federal, definitely. I mean, that was something that we really are hoping can help. That would be significant to allow districts to move forward, either from hybrid to full, or in those cases where they're doing more distance or remote to hybrid. Kathy, can you speak a bit toward the funding formulas and how that was used to get Fairfield their amount?
Yes, certainly, Commissioner. So the funding formula that was used for coronavirus relief was the same, obviously, as was used for each district. So, and Fairfield, unfortunately, under the ESSER funds, given that they use Title I as the allocation methodology, they ended up receiving certainly a much smaller amount than other communities. to the extent that Fairfield asked, and I'm trying to pull it up while we're talking, for PPE, that would have been fully funded. They would have been eligible for fully funded funding under that. They also would have been eligible for some transportation funding, because that was made available to all school districts. One of the things I would say, and that I think is probably helpful for, so Fairfield received $689,000 in coronavirus relief funds. You had a rather large request under transportation. But one of the things that we're going to be doing at the end of September is resurveying the districts based upon the costs that they're seeing now that they've been open for a month. And to the extent that what they're seeing on the ground differs from what the estimates they gave us prior to opening, we may be redistributing the funds. The CRF funds, and I think that this is one of the misunderstandings about them, are only provided on a reimbursement basis. So districts actually are going to have to provide documentation to the fact that they've spent these things. So to the extent that we see funding not being drawn down or used, potentially because the district's model has changed since their opening, it is our intention to reallocate those funds to assist districts, that have opened or are seeing costs increases in a different area. And that is something that we've already agreed to.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, that's okay. That's something that we've already talked to the Office of Policy and Management about, and they are supportive of us doing that.
So
along those lines of learning as you go, one other question: what are the expectations for school districts as they to move into full in-person based on the health metrics? Are there going to, if the health metrics remain the same, are we going to stay in this model, or are you going to expect school districts and nudge them to go to a full-time model?
So yes, we want to make sure that districts are following the models that were set up by our partners at DPH to get students in school as much as possible. I'm in Vernon, Connecticut right now. This is the boardroom there. We were visiting schools this morning where students are in a hybrid fashion. And I think it's critical that we recognize the fact that there's a level of confidence once you start doing it successfully. But the goal here is, as it should be throughout the state, once you get, whether it's a hybrid model, whatever hybrid model you choose, start thinking about how you're going to ramp up. We talk a lot about ramping down when the data suggests. We need to start thinking also, how are we going to ramp up? There's no substitute for getting students in front of a teacher. There's no substitute for a community to have students in school as much as possible. It's good for community, it's good for learning, and it's critically important. So to answer your question, yes, we're looking at those models. Getting started is a huge step. And then we need to really share best practices and promote the success of being able to get more students in.
Just to get back to this participation and attendance issue, and thank you, Commissioner, for mentioning the fact that the state will be doing more of a job to kind of monitor that. But how are you actually going to hold those districts accountable so it doesn't happen again? Because I'm worried about you're hearing situations of child abuse. Reporting is way down, not because it's not happening, but the kids are kind of falling off the radar screen. So how can we keep those districts accountable to ensure that kids are checking in and attendance is being taken and participation is up? What can we do to hold them accountable?
Thank you. And we too worry not only about obviously their physical and mental health well-being, but also their access to learning. That's critically important. So as I said earlier, we're standing up a system where data is going to be entered weekly, school by school, which is something that we never did before. And in places where the percentages are low, we're going to put increase, we're going to question, where necessary, engage other partners like DCF to try to mobilize support to get over there because we feel the same way. We have to create new systems, though, Representative. It's the system that we had last year where we found out what the October 1 number was and then monthly averages. That's not sufficient. So we're building up new systems to make sure that students are not left behind. Physically and emotionally safety is the most important, but also educationally. We can't let kids not access public education in Connecticut. We have to stand strong to make sure that they're getting it in the best possible format possible.